1999 is often celebrated as one of the greatest years in cinema history. The Matrix revolutionized special effects, Fight Club redefined storytelling, and The Sixth Sense captivated audiences worldwide. But beneath these towering successes were financial underperformers that studio executives still remember vividly. While audiences were busy watching Neo dodge bullets in slow motion, these 13 films were struggling at an alarming rate. From misguided marketing campaigns to ambitious budgets, these movies represent the financial challenges of Hollywood's otherwise brilliant year. What went wrong? How did films with A-list stars and massive budgets fall short of expectations? Let's count down the 13 biggest box office underperformers of 1999, ranked from unfortunate letdowns to major financial shortfalls. Warner Brothers' animated masterpiece The Iron Giant might be beloved today, but in 1999, it struggled at the box office harder than its titular character. With a production budget of $70 million and a box office return of just $31.3 million, the film lost the studio nearly $40 million. The most unfortunate part? The Iron Giant wasn't a bad movie, far from it. Critics adored it, and director Brad Bird would later go on to create hits like The Incredibles and Ratatouille for Pixar. So what went wrong? The blame falls squarely on Warner Brothers' marketing department, which effectively abandoned the film to focus resources on their summer tentpole, Wild Wild West. The studio's lack of faith resulted in minimal promotion, no Happy Meal toys, and a release date that dumped it into theaters with barely any fanfare. Executives later admitted they had no idea how to market an animated film that dealt with complex themes like death, paranoia, and Cold War tensions. The Iron Giant has since found its audience through home video and streaming, becoming one of the most respected animated films ever made. Its financial performance represents one of cinema's greatest ironies, proving that quality doesn't always translate to box office success. But the story gets even more frustrating when you consider that the studio's preferred project fared even worse financially. With an ensemble cast featuring Ben Stiller, Janeane Garofalo, William H. Macy, and Jeffrey Rush, Mystery Men seemed positioned for success. This quirky superhero comedy about a team of misfit heroes with questionable powers arrived just as superhero films were beginning their ascent to cultural dominance. Yet somehow, this $65 million production only managed to scrape together $33.5 million at the box office. Released during the competitive summer season, Mystery Men found itself overshadowed by bigger, louder blockbusters. The film's offbeat humor and satirical take on superheroes, which would likely thrive in today's more superhero-savvy culture, simply didn't connect with mainstream audiences of 1999. Critics were divided, with some appreciating its irreverent approach and others finding it too scattered. What's particularly ironic is that Mystery Men has since developed exactly the kind of appreciative audience its characters would admire: passionate and dedicated. The film was arguably ahead of its time, arriving before audiences were familiar enough with superhero conventions to appreciate its creative take on the genre. If released just a few years later in the post-Spider-Man era, this financial outcome might have been a different story entirely. But what happened next would prove even more challenging for a film featuring major Hollywood stars. When you pair Oscar winner Anthony Hopkins with Cuba Gooding Jr., fresh off his own Oscar win for Jerry Maguire, you'd expect box office success. Instead, Instinct delivered underwhelming results. This psychological drama about an anthropologist who lives among gorillas and is later imprisoned cost $80 million to produce, but returned a modest $34.1 million. The film suffered from an identity crisis. Marketed as a thriller, but playing more like a philosophical drama, it left audiences confused and ultimately disinterested. Critics found fault with the film, calling it pretentious and derivative of better works like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Gorillas in the Mist. Director John Turteltaub, who had previously found success with films like Cool Runnings and While You Were Sleeping, couldn't elevate this complex story. Perhaps most challenging was the timing. Releasing a thoughtful, cerebral drama in the summer blockbuster season proved to be a strategic misstep. Audiences seeking lighter entertainment weren't connecting with Hopkins' intense performance and metaphorical themes about human nature and civilization. Within weeks, Instinct faded from theaters and collective memory, becoming one of those films even its stars rarely mention in interviews. The next film on our list faced a similar outcome, but for entirely different reasons. Ron Howard's EDTV had the misfortune of being the second film about a man whose life becomes a TV show within a 12-month period. Coming on the heels of Peter Weir's acclaimed The Truman Show, EDTV was viewed by many as a similar concept despite significant differences in tone and approach. The Matthew McConaughey-led comedy cost $80 million to produce, but only managed to earn $35.2 million at the box office. While The Truman Show was a philosophical meditation on reality and free will, EDTV attempted to be a more grounded, comedic take on early reality television. Unfortunately, audiences and critics couldn't help but make comparisons, and EDTV inevitably suffered. The irony, EDTV's premise, a regular person becoming famous simply by having cameras follow their everyday life, actually predicted the reality TV boom that would dominate television in the following decade. The film's challenges weren't helped by a marketing campaign that failed to distinguish it from its predecessor or communicate its satirical edge. Despite a supporting cast that included Woody Harrelson, Ellen DeGeneres, and Martin Landau, EDTV quickly faded from theaters. Ron Howard, usually a reliable hitmaker, had delivered one of the few commercial underperformers of his directorial career. But even established directors can create box office challenges, as our next entry proves. Neil Jordan's supernatural thriller In Dreams represented one of the most significant percentage losses of any film in 1999. With a budget of $30 million and box office returns of just $12 million, this Annette Bening vehicle lost 60% of its investment. The film, which follows a woman who begins sharing dreams with an unsettling stranger, confused audiences with its disjointed narrative and surreal imagery. Jordan, known for acclaimed films like The Crying Game and Interview with the Vampire, delivered a movie that was perhaps too experimental for mainstream audiences. Critics found the plot convoluted and the tone inconsistent, veering between psychological thriller and supernatural elements without fully committing to either. Annette Bening's committed performance couldn't overcome a script that many found challenging to follow. DreamWorks SKG, still a relatively young studio at the time, adjusted their release strategy when it became clear audiences weren't responding. In Dreams joined a growing list of ambitious projects for the fledgling studio, suggesting that founder Steven Spielberg's success didn't automatically extend to every project under his company's banner. But not all of 1999's box office underperformers were artistic risks. Some were attempts to capitalize on nostalgia, as our next entry demonstrates. Some films struggle because they're too ambitious or artistic. The Mod Squad underperformed because it was neither. This adaptation of the popular 1960s TV series cost $50 million to produce but earned a disappointing $13.3 million. Starring Claire Danes, Omar Epps, and Giovanni Ribisi as a trio of juvenile delinquents recruited as undercover cops, the film was meant to update the counterculture vibe of the original for 90s audiences. The result was unsuccessful on every level. Critics expressed concerns about the film's thin storyline, dialogue quality, and lack of chemistry among its leads. Audiences who remembered the original series found little connection to what they loved, while younger viewers had no nostalgic connection to draw them in. Director Scott Silver, who would later receive acclaim for writing the screenplay for The Fighter, created a film that struggled to engage viewers, a challenging combination for box office success. MGM&UA adjusted their release strategy for the Mod Squad as audience response became clear, but the financial outcome was already established. The film became a reference point about the challenges of adapting television properties without a compelling creative approach. Unfortunately, Hollywood would continue to explore similar adaptations in the decades that followed. While the Mod Squad's performance issues were straightforward, our next entry's path to financial underperformance was more complex. Jamie Lee Curtis has been candid about her thoughts regarding Virus. The respected actress has described it as the worst movie I ever made, and audiences seem to agree. This sci-fi horror film about an alien electrical entity that takes over a Russian research vessel cost a substantial $75 million to produce, but returned only $30.6 million worldwide. What went wrong? Virtually everything. The production was plagued by problems from the start, with the original director leaving the project and extensive reshoots dramatically increasing the budget. The special effects, which consumed a significant portion of that budget, failed to impress audiences already spoiled by The Matrix earlier that year. The script, based on a Dark Horse comic book, offered nothing original in terms of plot or character. Most notably, the film simply didn't resonate with viewers. For a science fiction movie featuring unusual transformations and alien encounters, Virus generated more unintended reactions than genuine thrills. Universal Pictures, recognizing the situation, adjusted their marketing approach as the release date approached, effectively reducing promotion for the film. But even critically acclaimed projects weren't immune to box office challenges, as our next entry shows. Jim Carrey's transformative performance as comedian Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon earned him a Golden Globe and critical acclaim. It also resulted in financial challenges for Universal Pictures. The Milos Forman-directed biopic cost $82 million to produce, but only managed to earn $47.4 million at the box office, falling far short of expectations for a film starring one of Hollywood's most bankable comedic actors. The film's financial performance wasn't due to quality issues, but rather its challenging subject matter. Andy Kaufman's brand of avant-garde comedy and performance art was always divisive, appealing to a niche audience rather than the mainstream. Carrey's own fans, expecting something more in line with his comedic blockbusters like Ace Ventura or Liar Liar, were confronted instead with a complex, often uncomfortable examination of an enigmatic entertainer. The production itself was notoriously demanding, with Carrey remaining in character as Kaufman throughout filming, a process documented years later in the Netflix documentary Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond. This commitment produced an outstanding performance, but perhaps at the cost of creating a film with broad commercial appeal. Universal's difficulty in effectively marketing such an unconventional biopic further contributed to its financial results. Yet sometimes even critical acclaim and awards recognition can't ensure a film's financial success. Michael Mann's The Insider represents one of 1999's most acclaimed box office underperformers. This drama about a tobacco industry whistleblower, starring Russell Crowe and Al Pacino, received 7 Oscar nominations and nearly universal critical praise. Yet, despite its pedigree, the $68 million production only earned $60,300,000 worldwide, barely recouping its production costs before marketing expenses affected the bottom line. The film's commercial challenges highlight the difficulties faced by serious adult dramas, even those with A-list talent. The Insider's 157-minute runtime limited the number of daily screenings, while its complex exploration of corporate impropriety and journalistic integrity wasn't exactly the escapist entertainment many moviegoers seek. Disney's Touchstone Pictures struggled to market a film that offered no simple hooks or easily digestible taglines. What makes The Insider's financial performance particularly notable is that it came during a year when Crowe's career was ascending. He would win an Oscar the following year for Gladiator, and Mann was considered one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. The film has since been recognized as one of the finest of both men's careers, proving once again that artistic achievement and commercial success don't always align. But sometimes even the biggest stars can't guarantee a successful outcome for every project. Robin Williams as a robot seeking humanity should have been box office gold. Instead, Bicentennial Man became one of 1999's most significant financial underperformers. With a production budget of $100 million and worldwide returns of only $87.4 million, the film faced financial challenges after marketing costs were factored in. Based on Isaac Asimov's novella, the film suffered from a fundamental identity crisis, too sentimental and slow-moving for science fiction fans, yet too mechanically focused for those seeking Williams' trademark comedy. Bicentennial Man fell between genres and found no audience to call its own. Director Chris Columbus, who had previously collaborated with Williams on the hit Mrs. Doubtfire, couldn't recreate that success with this more existential tale. Critics were particularly critical, expressing concerns about the film's overly sentimental tone and lengthy 132-minute runtime. Williams' robot character ages over 200 years in the story, and many viewers felt they were experiencing every minute of that time span while watching. The film's financial performance marked a turning point in Williams' career, as the once reliable box office draw began experiencing a series of commercial challenges. Yet, even this high-profile underperformer pales in comparison to our next entry. Johnny Depp and Charlize Theron should have been a winning combination, but The Astronaut's Wife demonstrated that star power alone can't guarantee success for every concept. This sci-fi thriller about an astronaut who returns from space changed in unusual ways cost approximately $75 million to produce, but earned only $19.6 million at the box office, representing a significant financial shortfall. New Line Cinema had high hopes for the film, positioning it as a sophisticated thriller. Unfortunately, critics and audiences found it derivative and unengaging, with a premise that promised more excitement than it delivered. First-time director Rand Ravitch struggled to maintain tension throughout, resulting in a film that didn't fully realize its intriguing concept and talented cast. The marketing campaign, which intentionally focused on the psychological aspects rather than the film's science fiction elements, didn't connect with audiences. Genre fans who might have appreciated its sci-fi components weren't properly targeted. The Astronaut's Wife quickly faded from theaters and conversations, becoming one of those films that even its stars rarely acknowledge. But even this performance can't compare to the financial challenges that round out our list. Few films exemplify Hollywood's ambitious production scale quite like The 13th Warrior. This adaptation of Michael Crichton's novel Eaters of the Dead, starring Antonio Banderas, began with a $100 million budget that increased to an estimated $160 million after extensive reshoots and post-production adjustments. The worldwide box office return? A modest $61.7 million, representing one of the most significant financial shortfalls in Hollywood history. The troubles began when director John McTiernan, Die Hard, delivered his cut of the film, which studio executives and producer Michael Crichton found unsatisfactory. Crichton himself took over directorial duties for substantial reshoots, essentially creating a hybrid film that lacked cohesive vision. The production delays pushed back the release date multiple times, creating negative buzz within the industry. When The 13th Warrior finally reached theaters, critics noted it as an unfocused action film that didn't fully realize its promising premise of an Arab ambassador joining a band of Vikings. Audiences largely stayed away, and Disney had to address significant financial implications. The 13th Warrior's performance led to Crichton's decision to refocus on his writing career rather than film production. But remarkably, one film faced even greater financial challenges during 1999's box office season. In terms of sheer investment scale, no film from 1999 can match Wild Wild West. Reuniting Men in Black director Barry Sonnenfeld with star Will Smith seemed like a promising formula for success. Instead, it resulted in one of the more notable financial shortfalls in Hollywood history. With a production budget of $170 million, plus an estimated $80 million in marketing costs, even the worldwide gross of $222.1 million left Warner Brothers with concerning financial results potentially exceeding $50 million. The production faced various challenges from the start. The original script underwent numerous revisions with the core concept, a sci-fi western comedy featuring giant mechanical spiders, evolving significantly with each iteration. Smith, coming off consecutive blockbusters, had chosen this project over The Matrix, a decision he has since thoughtfully discussed in interviews. The film's development process became representative of ambitious Hollywood productions. Producer John Peters' well-known preference for including a giant mechanical spider, an idea that dated back to his involvement with a different Superman project, became a much-discussed industry anecdote. The special effects budget increased substantially, with significant resources invested in sequences that ultimately didn't resonate with audiences. Critics had mixed reactions to the film, with Roger Ebert noting its comedic limitations, and audiences largely agreed. Despite opening at #1 at the box office, word-of-mouth feedback caused attendance to decline in subsequent weeks. The film received multiple Razzie Awards, including recognition for Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, Worst Song, and Worst Screen Couple. Smith's career continued successfully, but Wild Wild West became a reference point about prioritizing special effects and high concepts over coherent storytelling. Looking at these 13 financial outcomes, certain patterns emerge. Ambitious budgets, production hurdles, marketing miscalculations, and disconnects between creative vision and audience expectations affected nearly all these films. Some were artistic endeavors that didn't immediately find their audience, while others were commercial projects that viewers didn't fully embrace. What's particularly fascinating is how many of these films have found second lives years later. The Iron Giant is now considered an animated classic. Mystery Men has a devoted following. Man on the Moon is respected as a showcase for Jim Carrey's dramatic abilities. Even commercial underperformers like Wild Wild West have developed appreciation for their unique qualities and ambitious approaches. 1999 represents a fascinating inflection point in Hollywood history, a year that produced some of cinema's most innovative and enduring classics alongside some of its most notable financial missteps. Films like The Matrix pointed toward Hollywood's digital future, while underperforming projects like The 13th Warrior represented the end of an era of ambitious spending and creative experimentation. These financial results remind us that box office performance isn't always an indicator of a film's quality or cultural significance. Some of these movies struggled to find their audience at the time, while others were simply ahead of their moment or mismarketed. Either way, they form an essential part of understanding 1999's cinematic landscape, the contrasts that make the year's achievements stand out even more clearly. After all, without the occasional Wild Wild West, would we appreciate The Matrix quite as much?